Valdez remained at attention, understanding that her future, and perhaps the future of other soldiers who didn't fit conventional expectations, would be determined by decisions made in this room. The silence stretched as Colonel Hawkins weighed precedent against necessity, regulation against results, tradition against the reality of modern warfare where competence mattered more than conformity. After reviewing all the evidence and consulting with Theater Command, Colonel Hawkins said finally, "I've made my decision. Staff Sergeant Valdez, you will receive a formal reprimand for disobeying direct orders, which will be placed in your service record. You will also receive the Silver Star for gallantry in action and exceptional marksmanship under fire. Sometimes the Army needs to acknowledge both the violation and the necessity that drove it." The decision was Solomon-like in its complexity, punishment, and recognition in equal measure, acknowledging both the breach of protocol and the lives saved by that breach. Valdez felt a mix of relief and frustration, understanding that she'd been simultaneously vindicated and disciplined for the same actions. "Furthermore," the colonel continued, "I'm recommending you for advanced sniper training at Fort Bragg and assignment to Special Operations Command. It seems clear that your talents are being underutilized in conventional operations." Commander Thorne's face showed a mixture of emotions, professional respect warring with personal pride, acknowledgement of competence struggling against institutional resistance to change. He'd been forced to confront not just Valdez's capabilities, but his own assumptions about what made a soldier effective in combat. "Ma'am," Valdez said carefully, "what about my current assignment?" Colonel Hawkins looked directly at Commander Thorne, her expression making it clear that changes were coming whether he welcomed them or not. "Commander Thorne and I will be having extensive discussions about sniper utilization and tactical decision-making. I suspect those conversations will lead to significant adjustments in how we employ our assets in theater." The meeting concluded with military efficiency, salutes, acknowledgments, and the beginning of administrative processes that would reshape careers and possibly doctrine. Valdez left the command post with her future secure but uncertain. The radio crackled with static as Commander Marcus Thorne stared through his binoculars at the empty mountainside. 3 SEAL teams had been pinned down for 6 hours in the Hindu Kush, and their Overwatch sniper hadn't made contact in 47 minutes. The Taliban had them surrounded, using the terrain like a chess master controlling every piece on the board. What Thorne didn't know was that his missing sniper wasn't missing at all. She was methodically working her way through a kill list that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about warfare. Staff Sergeant Kira, Phantom. Valdez pressed her eye against the Schmidt and Bender scope, her breathing controlled to the rhythm of her heartbeat. The wind at this altitude carried the scent of snow and gunpowder, and she'd been motionless for 3 hours, watching the enemy positions through her ghillie suit that made her invisible against the rocky outcropping. Her Barrett felt like an extension of her body, the familiar weight of 13 years in the Army creating a deadly symbiosis between woman and weapon. "Ghost Actual, this is Overwatch 7, she whispered into her radio, knowing Thorne would dismiss her report like he had every other time. "I have visual on 8 Tangos, grid reference 374921. Request permission to engage." The response came back cold and immediate. "Negative, Overwatch 7. Hold position and maintain surveillance only. We don't need a cowboy up there." Valdez closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar sting of being reduced to an observer when she could be a game changer. They called her Phantom because of her ability to appear and disappear without a trace, but also because Thorne treated her like she wasn't really there. To him, she was a reluctant necessity, a political correctness checkbox in his all-male unit. He'd never seen her work, never witnessed what happened when she was given permission to do what she did best. Below, muzzle flashes erupted from concealed positions as the Taliban fighters unleashed another barrage on the trapped SEAL teams. Valdez could see everything from her elevated position, the intricate web of enemy movement, the vulnerable gaps in their defensive line, the way they rotated ammunition between positions. Her crosshairs found the first target, a spotter feeding coordinates to a mortar team that was devastating the valley floor where Alpha Team had taken cover behind a destroyed vehicle. She adjusted for wind speed, elevation, and the slight tremor in her hands that came not from fear but from restraint. One shot could save lives. One shot could change the tide. But Commander Thorne's voice echoed in her headset, treating her like a liability rather than an asset. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd earned more confirmed kills than any sniper in his command. Yet here she was, forced to watch good soldiers die while she waited for permission that might never come. The Taliban spotter below shifted his position, completely unaware that death was calculating the exact distance to his skull. Valdez had been here before, not just in Afghanistan, but in this moment of decision where protocol clashed with necessity. She thought of her father, a Marine who died in Fallujah when she was 16, never knowing she would follow in his footsteps. He taught her that sometimes a soldier's greatest courage wasn't in following orders, but in making the hard choice when lives hung in the balance. Alpha Team, this is Ghost Actual. Commander Thorne's voice cut through the static, strained with frustration. What's your ammunition status? We need you mobile in 10 mics. Ghost Actual, Alpha Team, came the desperate reply from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the team leader pinned behind twisted metal that used to be a Humvee. We're down to our last mag, sir. That mortar team has our position dialed in. We need immediate fire support or we're not walking out of here. Valdez listened to the exchange, her jaw tightening as she watched the Taliban fighters moving with increasing confidence. They knew they had the Americans trapped, and they were positioning for a final assault. Through her scope, she could see the precise moment when everything would go wrong. The mortar team was setting up for a direct hit on Alpha Team's position, while a flanking element moved through a dried riverbed that would put them behind the SEAL's defensive line. Ghost Actual, we have movement from the northeast. Rodriguez's voice crackled with static and barely controlled panic. Estimate 15 to 20 fighters moving to flank us. We are about to be overrun. Thorne's response carried the weight of command and the helplessness of a chess player watching his pieces get captured one by one. Copy that, Alpha Team. CAS is 15 minutes out. Hold your position and conserve ammunition. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Valdez could see the mathematics of death playing out in real time, and every calculation led to the same conclusion. Her teammates were going to die unless someone acted. The enemy spotter was 47 seconds away from calling in coordinates that would end the lives of 8 American soldiers. Her finger found the trigger, and for the first time in 6 hours, Staff Sergeant Kira Valdez stopped asking for permission. The Barrett's report echoed across the mountainside like thunder, a sound that would haunt the Taliban fighters for the rest of their considerably shortened lives. The .50 caliber round covered the 800 meters in 1.2 seconds, finding its target with surgical precision. The enemy spotter's radio went silent mid-transmission, his coordinates lost to the wind and stone. Valdez was already acquiring her second target before the first body hit the ground. What the hell was that? Commander Thorne's voice exploded through the radio. Overwatch 7, did you just fire without authorization? Valdez didn't respond. She was in the zone now, that sacred space where time moved differently and every heartbeat was synchronized with death itself. Her second shot eliminated the mortar team leader, a bearded man who'd been pointing toward Alpha Team's position with the confidence of someone who thought he was invisible. The mortar fell silent, its deadly arithmetic interrupted by American precision. Overwatch 7, respond immediately, Thorne demanded, his voice carrying the kind of fury reserved for insubordinate soldiers who dared to save lives without proper paperwork. Ghost Actual, this is Overwatch 7, Valdez replied, her voice steady as she tracked her third target. Engaging multiple hostiles to prevent Alpha Team's compromise. Time-sensitive targets require immediate action. The third shot took down a machine gunner who'd been laying suppressive fire on Bravo team's position. Suddenly, the Americans had breathing room, space to think and move and fight back. The Taliban's coordinated assault was becoming a chaotic scramble as their key personnel disappeared one by one, picked off by a ghost in the mountains they couldn't see or hear. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with something approaching disbelief. "Ghost Actual, the pressure's off. That sniper just eliminated their forward observers and heavy weapons. We can move." Commander Thorne found himself in the uncomfortable position of wanting to court-martial someone who was single-handedly turning the tide of battle. His tactical mind understood what was happening, even as his ego bristled at being shown up by a soldier he'd dismissed. The Taliban fighters below were losing their coordination, their careful positioning disrupted by an enemy they couldn't locate or counter. Valdez's fourth target was a squad leader who'd been directing the flanking maneuver. Through her scope, she could see the exact moment when he realized his men were being systematically eliminated by an invisible enemy. The fear in his eyes was the last thing he saw before her bullet found him. The flanking elements scattered, their assault turning into a retreat as panic spread through their ranks like wildfire. "Alpha Team is mobile," Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying a new kind of respect. "Moving to secondary position now. That Overwatch is a damn artist." The compliment reached Valdez as she lined up her fifth shot, this one on a communications specialist who'd been trying to coordinate with Taliban reinforcements. She exhaled slowly, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about since she first held her father's service rifle at age 10. Not the killing, she took no pleasure in that, but the protection, the way a single well-placed shot could save 8 lives and turn defeat into victory. Commander Thorne's voice came through the headset, and for the first time the mockery was gone. "Overwatch 7, what's your ammunition status?" "Ghost Actual, I'm at 7 rounds remaining, 15 targets still visible," she replied, already tracking her 6th victim through the scope. "Taliban reinforcements approaching from the south, estimated time of arrival 12 minutes. The 6th shot silenced a sniper who'd been trying to counter her position. She watched him fall from his concealed spot in a cluster of rocks, his rifle clattering down the mountainside. His death meant her teammates could move freely without fear of precision fire from the enemy. Each kill wasn't just elimination, it was liberation. "Bravo Team, advance to grid 375918, Thorne commanded, and Valdez could hear the change in his tactical thinking. He was adapting to her capabilities instead of ignoring them, using her Overwatch to reshape the battlefield geometry. "Charlie Team, prepare to support Alpha's movement." The 7th target was a veteran fighter, older than the others, who'd been trying to rally his scattered men. Valdez recognized the type, a seasoned warrior who'd survived Soviet occupation and American intervention, someone who understood mountain warfare better than most. He almost spotted her position, his trained eyes scanning the ridgeline where she lay hidden. Almost. Her bullet found him before his warnings could reach his comrades. Silence spread across the battlefield like ripples in a pond. Where once there had been coordinated enemy fire, now there was confusion and retreat. The Taliban fighters were learning what American soldiers had known for months, but their commander had chosen to ignore. Staff Sergeant Kira, Phantom. Valdez was the most lethal sniper in theater, and she was just getting started. "All teams, this is Ghost Actual," Thorne's voice carried a new edge of confidence. "Advance and secure the LZ. Overwatch 7, you have weapons free. Hunt them down." Those 4 words, "you have weapons free," were the closest thing to an apology Marcus Thorne would ever offer, but for Valdez, they were enough. She acquired her 8th target and smiled grimly as her crosshairs found their mark. The 8th kill was different from the others. This target was running, abandoning his position and his comrades in a desperate attempt to escape the invisible death that stalked the mountainside. Valdez led him perfectly, her bullet intersecting his path with mathematical precision. He tumbled into a ravine, and with him went the last organized resistance in the immediate area. Ghost Actual, this is Alpha Team. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio with something approaching awe. LZ is secure. That sniper just broke their entire defensive line. I've never seen anything like it. Commander Thorne stood in the valley below, watching his teams move with a freedom they hadn't possessed in hours. The tactical situation had completely reversed, from desperate defense to controlled advance, all because one soldier had decided to ignore his orders and do her job. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent months treating Valdez like a token, a diversity hire who couldn't possibly measure up to his male snipers, and she just delivered a masterclass in precision warfare. Valdez chambered her 9th round, scanning for targets through her scope. The remaining Taliban fighters were scattered and demoralized, some abandoning their weapons in their haste to escape. But she found one more, a fighter trying to set up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher in a position that would threaten the incoming helicopter extraction. This shot required all her skill, compensating for distance, wind, and the target's movement as he struggled with the unfamiliar weapon. The Barrett spoke again, its voice carrying across the mountains like a final judgment. The 9th target dropped beside his RPG, the threat to American lives eliminated before it could manifest. Valdez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, not for the killing, but for the saving. 8 American soldiers would go home to their families because she'd chosen courage over compliance. Overwatch 7, Thorne's voice came through the radio, carefully controlled but carrying undertones of something that might have been respect. What's your assessment of the tactical situation? For the first time in their professional relationship, he was asking for her opinion rather than giving her orders. Valdez swept her scope across the battlefield, cataloging the scattered enemy positions and the gaps in their defensive line. The Taliban's coordinated assault had become a rout, their careful planning undone by precision fire from a position they'd never been able to locate. Ghost Actual, enemy forces are broken and retreating, she reported. Estimate 3 to 4 fighters remaining in effective positions, but they're focused on escape rather than engagement. LZ remains secure for extraction. Below, she could see Alpha Team members collecting intelligence from the abandoned enemy positions, their movements confident and professional now that the immediate threat had been neutralized. The transformation was remarkable, from pinned down and desperate to tactically dominant in less than 20 minutes, all because someone had finally let the Phantom do what she did best. The sound of rotor blades echoed off the canyon walls as the extraction helicopter approached, its pilot navigating by the smoke grenades that Alpha Team had deployed to mark the landing zone. Valdez tracked one final target through her scope, a Taliban fighter who'd positioned himself with a clear shot at the incoming aircraft. This would be her 10th kill, the one that would cement her legend and force Commander Thorne to confront everything he thought he knew about leadership and prejudice. The fighter raised his AK-47, leading the helicopter in an attempt to bring it down before the Americans could escape with their intelligence and their lives. Valdez's crosshairs found him with the inevitability of mathematics, her breathing steady despite the importance of the moment. This shot wasn't just about eliminating a threat. It was about proving that excellence had no gender, that a soldier's worth was measured in results rather than assumptions. Her final shot rang across the mountains with the finality of justice. The 10th target collapsed, his weapon unfired, his threat to American lives ended by a woman he'd never seen and never would. The helicopter touched down safely, its crew unaware that they owed their lives to a sniper who'd been dismissed and doubted by her own command. All teams, this is Ghost Actual, Thorne's voice carried across the radio with new authority and perhaps for the first time genuine humility. Outstanding work today. Overwatch 7, prepare for extraction. And, he paused, the words clearly difficult for a man accustomed to being right about everything. Exceptional shooting. Valdez began the methodical process of packing her equipment, each movement precise and economical. Her ghillie suit had kept her invisible for hours, but now she was ready to emerge from the shadows and face whatever came next. She disobeyed a direct order and in doing so, had saved lives and won a battle that seemed lost. The contradiction would have to be resolved, but that was a problem for headquarters and politicians. As she prepared to move from her position, Valdez allowed herself one last look through her scope at the battlefield below. The bodies of her targets lay scattered across the mountainside, 10 precise shots that had rewritten the tactical situation and forced a reckoning with prejudice and assumptions. She thought of her father, wondering what he would have made of his daughter's moment of truth, her choice to prioritize lives over orders. The helicopter was loading the SEAL teams, their movements quick and efficient as they prepared to depart the killing ground that had nearly become their grave. Commander Thorne stood beside the aircraft, his posture suggesting a man grappling with uncomfortable revelations. He'd commanded this operation believing he understood the capabilities of every soldier under his authority, but Staff Sergeant Kira, Phantom, Valdez had just taught him that competence and courage came in forms he'd never expected to respect. Valdez moved down the mountainside with practiced stealth, her Barrett secured across her back, and her equipment packed with the efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. Each step took her closer to a confrontation that would determine whether she faced court-martial or commendation. She'd crossed a line when she ignored Thorne's orders, but she'd also demonstrated why that line sometimes needed to be crossed. The helicopter crew chief waved her forward as she approached the landing zone, his face showing the kind of respect reserved for someone who just pulled off the impossible. Word had already spread among the teams about what she'd accomplished from her Overwatch position: 10 kills, 10 lives saved, one battle turned from defeat into victory. These were soldiers who understood marksmanship, who knew the difference between lucky shots and surgical precision. Phantom, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called out as she reached the aircraft, using her call sign with new meaning. That was some shooting up there. You saved our asses. She nodded curtly, not trusting herself to respond with words. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, replaced by the weight of what she'd done and what it might cost her. Disobeying orders was a serious offense, regardless of the outcome. But watching her teammates die while she had the power to save them would have been a worse failure, one that would have haunted her forever. Commander Thorne approached as the rotors spun up for departure, his expression unreadable behind military bearing and tactical sunglasses. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the rotor wash, a female staff sergeant who'd just rewritten the rules of engagement and a male commander who'd been forced to confront his own biases in the most dramatic way possible. "We'll talk when we get back to base," he said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. But there was something in his tone that hadn't been there before: acknowledgement, perhaps even a grudging respect for someone who'd chosen effectiveness over obedience. Valdez strapped herself into the aircraft, her Barrett secured in the weapons rack beside the other team members' gear. Through the small window, she watched the battlefield recede below, the scattered enemy positions and the evidence of her marksmanship growing smaller until they disappeared into the vast landscape of the Hindu Kush. 10 targets eliminated, 8 American lives saved, 1 career possibly destroyed. The flight back to base gave her time to think about consequences and contradictions. She'd proven herself beyond any doubt, demonstrated a level of skill and tactical understanding that even her harshest critics couldn't dismiss. But she'd also violated the chain of command, ignored direct orders, and forced a confrontation with policies and prejudices that the military establishment might not be ready to address. As the helicopter descended toward the forward operating base, Valdez could see the controlled chaos of military life spread out below: soldiers moving between buildings, vehicles being maintained, the endless logistics of keeping a fighting force operational in hostile territory. Somewhere in that maze of activity, decisions would be made about her future, about whether saving lives justified disobeying orders, about whether the military was ready to fully embrace soldiers who didn't fit traditional expectations. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and immediately the crew chief was directing them off the aircraft with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Valdez shouldered her pack and followed the SEAL teams across the tarmac, aware that every eye was on her. That word of her performance had already spread through the rumor mill that was faster than any official communication. Commander Thorne gestured for her to follow him toward the command post, his stride purposeful but not hostile. They walked in silence through the base, past soldiers who stopped their conversations to watch the sniper who'd just become legend. Some faces showed curiosity, others respect, and a few displayed the kind of skepticism that suggested not everyone was ready to accept what she'd accomplished. The command post was a study in controlled military efficiency. Maps covered the walls, radio operators maintained contact with units across the theater, and intelligence analysts processed the constant stream of information that kept the war machine functioning. Colonel Patricia Hawkins, the base commander, looked up from a tactical display as they entered, her expression giving nothing away. "Staff Sergeant Valdez," Colonel Hawkins said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her rank through competence rather than politics. "I've been reading the after-action reports from today's operation. Interesting reading." Valdez stood at attention, her mind racing through possible responses and potential consequences. Court-martial was still a possibility, despite the successful outcome of her actions. The military valued discipline and chain of command above almost everything else, and she'd violated both in spectacular fashion. "Commander Thorne has recommended you for disciplinary action for disobeying direct orders," the colonel continued, and Valdez felt her stomach drop. "He's also recommended you for the Silver Star for your actions in saving 8 American lives under fire. It presents something of an administrative challenge." The contradiction was pure military bureaucracy, simultaneous punishment and recognition for the same actions. Valdez remained silent, knowing that anything she said could only make the situation worse. The decision wasn't hers to make. It belonged to officers who would have to balance military law against military necessity. "I've been in the Army for 26 years, Colonel Hawkins said, moving around her desk to face Valdez directly. "I've seen a lot of soldiers, male and female, prove themselves in ways that challenged conventional thinking. What you did today saved lives, but it also raised questions about command authority and battlefield discipline." Valdez finally spoke, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of her situation. "Ma'am, I understand I violated orders, but I watched 8 American soldiers about to die while I had the capability to save them. I made a choice." Colonel Hawkins studied her for a long moment, weighing factors that went beyond military regulation into the realm of human judgment and moral complexity. Commander Thorne stood beside them, his earlier hostility replaced by something that looked like internal conflict, the struggle of a leader forced to confront his own limitations and prejudices. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has submitted a statement describing your actions," the colonel said, retrieving a folder from her desk. "According to his account, your intervention was the difference between successful extraction and catastrophic loss of American lives. He's requested permission to submit your name for the Medal of Honor." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant explosion. Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration, reserved for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. Valdez felt the weight of the moment, understanding that she stood at the intersection of military tradition and evolving reality, where exceptional performance by an underestimated soldier had forced a reckoning with institutional assumptions. "However," Colonel Hawkins continued, her voice carrying the careful balance of military justice, "exceptional results don't automatically excuse insubordination. The chain of command exists for reasons that go beyond individual capability. If every soldier decided when to follow orders based on their personal judgment, we'd have chaos instead of military discipline. Commander Thorne stepped forward, his posture suggesting a man who'd come to a difficult decision. "Ma'am, I need to address my role in today's events." Staff Sergeant Valdez requested permission to engage multiple times, and I denied those requests based on tactical considerations that may not have been sound. It was the closest thing to an admission of error that his pride would allow, but both women understood the subtext. His tactical considerations had been based on prejudice and assumption rather than professional assessment of her capabilities. The acknowledgement hung between them like a bridge across a chasm of misunderstanding. "The question before us," Colonel Hawkins said, "is how the military adapts when traditional approaches conflict with exceptional performance. Staff Sergeant Valdez, your actions today demonstrated remarkable skill and judgment. They also represented a fundamental challenge to military order and discipline." Valdez remained at attention, understanding that her future, and perhaps the future of other soldiers who didn't fit conventional expectations, would be determined by decisions made in this room. The silence stretched as Colonel Hawkins weighed precedent against necessity, regulation against results, tradition against the reality of modern warfare where competence mattered more than conformity.